Good afternoon, everybody. This is Arun Wadvai from the Ingram Micro Cloud Sales Team. Today, I'm pleased to provide you with an update on the Ingram Micro Cloud Elevate update. Today, we're going to cover some interesting areas around Office 365 updates, the Microsoft Azure updates. We're going to also include an update on where we're up to around the reserved instances. And then quickly towards the end, I'll also provide you with an update on the Azure Accelerate program. This is a new program, so we're going to do just a soft launch today for people that have joined the webinar. So our main presenter today is Robert Crane, who's a Microsoft MVP. Robert's been in the industry now for many years and obviously is an expert in this particular area. And we'll be covering off the three components I've covered at the beginning of the agenda there. We'll then follow that up with a question and answer session. So any questions that you have, obviously, from Rob's presentations, feel free to raise those in the chat box and we'll get to those straight after Rob's presentation. Then I'll just quickly take you through our new program, and that will be our agenda for today. So Rob, over to you.
Right, thanks Arun. So let's kick this off and start off with some updates. So hopefully the slides will move down. So let's talk about what's happened in Office 365 world to get things started. So one of the things Microsoft has announced just recently is a free version of Microsoft Teams. Now, previously Teams was available with subscriptions that included SharePoint licensing. So Microsoft Teams is the new collaboration style environment that sits on top of common Office 365 services like emails, chat, and SharePoint. It allows users to work together in an environment and, like I said, have chat conversations rather than emails, to share files without the burdensome overhead of maybe a fully blown SharePoint site, and also extend that by including additional options to extend this item out. Now, one of the big benefits we get here is that the Teams environment is the same on a mobile app, on the desktop, and also on the web. Now, as I mentioned, Microsoft is making that freely available, so you can sign up to a version of Microsoft Teams using an account that currently doesn't have a commercial Teams item tied to it. So if you have Office 365 with your production emails, then use something like your Hotmail or Gmail or Xbox credentials, and you can set up a free team. Where I see this as being having great potential is the ability to go out and obviously get customers on board with Teams, show them the benefit without any cost. But I think it's also very good to allow you to work with those non-for-profits, with organizations that you're involved with, like maybe charities or sporting events or associations, that you can go in and create that, get people using, get all the benefits to help them collaborate better, and then hopefully that would then spur people to say, you know, this is really good, could you also do it for us in a commercial environment? So again, make sure that you have a look at the option for Teams. Basically, it will give you 300 users. It will give you around up to 600 gig of data, and basically has the majority of the functionality you see in the commercial Teams environment. So let's get to the next item. So one of the other products that Microsoft has recently made available is Whiteboard. So Whiteboard was in preview. This is, again, a way to obviously share information as it would with a standard physical whiteboard. But the great thing here is that you can share that information with people across the internet. So you can share that on mobile devices. You can also share that on desktop. So we are waiting for the iOS and Android apps for Whiteboard to drop, but they're not far away. But you can certainly set this up on Windows 10 and you can use it as a digital whiteboard, collaborate with people anywhere they have access to the internet, and then save that information for later use. So again, an environment where it's very easy, much easier to share information between parties by actually drawing or sketching it all out. I think it makes it much easier to work with in a product like this. It's also, again, integrated with things like the larger Surface devices that Microsoft has. So if you are going down that path, it's going to give you that consistent look and feel across there. So if you have an Office 365 subscription, you'll find that Whiteboard has already been enabled for your environment. Just a matter of installing the app on your local device, and then you'll be able to access that and then start collaborating with people inside and potentially outside your organization as well. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, I think this is a really big thing that Microsoft has just added, and it actually today went live for a lot of tenants, is the Stream Live event. So what this means is back in the day, we had something called Skype Broadcast Meeting that allowed us to use Office 365 very much like what you're seeing here with GoToMeeting, that you could broadcast information presentations to a audience inside and outside the business. You could record that automatically and do a number of additional options. So now that video and Skype are being transitioned into other products, we've now got this ability with Stream to allow you to take meetings and to broadcast that across the organization. Now, if you haven't looked at Stream, Stream is typically available with enterprise licensing. It is also available with the new Microsoft 365 business license. So it's generally not available in the business licensing, but it is with Microsoft 365 as well as the enterprise SKUs. Think of it as a private YouTube channel or a corporate YouTube channel that allows you to upload video. Once you upload that video, it will then be transcribed. So on the right-hand side there, you'll see the transcription. Once a video has been transcribed, obviously it's going to give you the advantage of it being searchable. So all the text that's up there will be searchable. And you'll also see down the bottom, actually under the video, there are a number of timelines there. Now those timelines are individual speakers that can be that are recognized by the video. So the video can not only transcribe, it can also recognize the speakers when they start speaking. So you can, again, move to that exact location in the video. So there are a number of different Stream plans, but the basic one that you do get will allow you to do a lot of this sort of functionality. And it's very good for creating training portals, occupational health and safety training. When you have meetings in Teams, you can now select the option for those to be automatically recorded. The meetings that are recorded in Teams are then uploaded into Stream, and we're going to now get the ability to stream these live events. Now, because it's being built with a common technology in Office 365 being Microsoft Stream, Stream live events will be available inside Microsoft Teams, inside Yammer, inside SharePoint as well. So we'll be able to surface these events directly through other options that are available in Office 365. So you can have a look at the link there. Go in and have a look at live events. You might already have access to it. Have a bit of a play with it. I think it's a really good, really powerful option for those people who already have that enabled. So again, that's a really great add-on, great value that Microsoft has added to the whole Office 365 suite there. So obviously, not only has Office 365 been updating, we've also seen some major updates in the Azure platform as well. So the first one is that Azure File Sync has gone general availability. So Azure File Sync gives you the ability to put an agent on an on-premises file server for that to be synchronized up to Azure File Store, and then for that to be then synchronized to other on-premises file servers. So one of the things that is not supported is putting the OneDrive for Business Sync client on a server. It can be done, but technically it's not supported. The solution is to look at something like Azure File Sync that will basically synchronize files between file servers to a storage location in Azure and then to additional locations wherever you choose. Now, the files can obviously be accessed on premises. They can also be accessed directly from Azure. And again, it's going to give you that ability to, again, have some of your information obviously replicated and backed up, I suppose, to Azure. The other advantage that we've got is integration with things like Azure Backup. So now Azure Backup can reach into the files that are synchronized into the cloud in Azure and back those up for you. So again, you synchronize your files from on-prem, you synchronize them to a location in Azure using this service, and then they can also be backed up directly from that cloud service without necessarily having to do it on-prem. So if you haven't had a look, I'd certainly suggest you go in and have a look at the Azure File Sync service. It is a great way, and in many ways people are saying it's a similar sort of concept, or it's a cloud option of DFS perhaps. So again, have a look at it, add it to your arsenal. It can solve a number of common problems that customers may be having when it comes to obviously replicating and sharing their data between different locations using the cloud. Now, one of the other things that Azure has added is the ability to now have standard SSD drives. Now, what we used to have was an environment where premium disks were SSD, obviously faster capacity, higher IOPS, more reliability, and then the cheaper option was to go to standard disks, which were mechanical disks, and the benefits of that obviously were price, but we paid a bit of a cost there when it came to things like performance and size. Now, Microsoft has added a third offering for us. We've now got standard SSDs, so these are obviously aimed at replacing the standard hard disks that are there in the long run. They're going to give you better performance, better IOPS, better reliability, but they're not going to be at the same cost level as the premium SSDs. So the premium SSDs are going to stay. They're going to be the ones you want to use for those environments where you need really, really strong or really, really fast disk processing. And again, we're finding as we are on-prem that the mechanical disks are being phased out, and we are going to the ability to have standard SSDs. So when you go in and do a price calculation or a quote using the Azure calculator, you'll now see that there is an offering in there for standard SSDs. Now remember that certain Azure machines don't support SSDs, so there is some caveats around which one, but most machines with an S, so DV2S for example, will support SSD drives. So again, have a look at that, but standard SSD drives are now available for you to use if you want when it comes to configuring Azure virtual machines. Now, this is one that was announced a little while ago, and I think it's going to potentially trip up a lot of people. So what Microsoft has done automatically across all tenants, Office 365 and Azure, it has implemented something called the Azure AD baseline policy. Now, what this effectively does is that this is going to set a policy requirement that all global administrators of the tenant will be required to have multi-factor authentication. So Microsoft's taken the proactive step security-wise to ensure that by default, that all global administrators are using multi-factor authentication after the date when this policy kicks in. Now, my understanding is that's probably going to be in late August. At this point in time, the policy still is in preview, which means it isn't as yet enforced. But if you go into the location and have a look at the link here and go into your Azure AD and then have a look at conditional access, you'll see that that policy probably already is in there. Now, reading the fine print there, what it's saying is that this policy will move from preview to production, and that will then start enforcing the requirement for all global administrators to have two-factor authentication. Now, if you don't want that, you have the option to go in and disable the policy totally, so there'll be no action on any global administrators. You've also got the option to go in there and obviously exclude certain people, so put them in a certain security group, make sure that they don't have two-factor authentication. Now, I think where most people are going to get potentially tripped up here is the fact that many backup products and synchronization users that people have as service accounts will probably be affected by this because they aren't logged in by a user, but they need the rights obviously to do backups, to do synchronization and so on. Now, when this policy kicks in, if nothing's been changed, those accounts potentially will require two-factor authentication, and that may mean that synchronization and things like backup, if you've got that set up, may fail because obviously that account will need two-factor authentication, or the policy will require to have two-factor authentication. So My advice to you very strongly is read the documentation or read the link that we've got there, go in and have a look at this policy, and again, either turn it off if you don't want to have it enabled when it goes to production, or basically set the exception so that your service accounts are exempt from having multi-factor authentication. So again, be very, very aware that this policy is, I would say, probably within the month is going to go to production and will be part of any tenant that is running Office 365 or Azure. Now, the other thing that Azure has just given us is the Azure firewall. So many people obviously have on-prem firewalls. What we need as we move more of our infrastructure into an environment like Azure is we need to, again, have the devices that can do basically the same thing in our cloud environment. So again, Microsoft's giving us this ability to go in and configure an Azure firewall as a device, a virtual device. We can manage our on-prem environment. We can manage our Azure environment. So you may want to set up an environment where your Azure resources are basically not directly connected to the internet. Instead, they go through a Azure firewall, which then allows them access based on rules and policies as firewalls do. One of the big benefits of having an Azure firewall is going to be that all the security, all the alerting, all the stuff that Azure is doing for you in the background is going to be available thanks to this service. So if there are security alerts or if the performance issues, that will be rolled up into the standard Azure tools, the single dashboard that is already part of Azure. So if you've got infrastructure or looking to go infrastructure, or you're looking maybe to implement a device option in Azure to protect your environment, your infrastructure, again, look at Azure Firewall, which is now in public preview. The other big benefit, obviously, of doing something like this in Azure is that once you've set it up once, you can then take the configuration script that it uses to create itself, and you can then apply that or modify that, apply that in other locations. So then that's the big benefit of having a software-based infrastructure. All right, so with those quick updates done, let's go in and talk about reserved instances here in Azure. So many people probably aren't aware that there are a significant number of ways that you can look to save money with Azure VM. So as with any environment, Office 365 or whatever, when it is run up out of the box, it takes the default options. Those default options are aimed to obviously suit the largest amount of people to enable them to get their jobs done. However, best practice is obviously to go in and configure those to the needs of the customer and to the environment. So some of the things Azure can do for us is we've got the ability to already go in and configure low priority machines. So in an environment where on-prem everything was lumped into a single server, you could certainly break things out into a number of smaller servers. So let's take a very common on-prem piece, which is a domain controller. You could break a domain controller out into a standard standalone machine. Now, the resources needed to run a domain controller aren't that great these days. Okay, so again, you could use a much lower priority, therefore a much cheaper machine to do a domain controller and then have your data or your file servers on other machines. So again, you've got a range of machines you can mix and match. You've got burstable machines, you've got low priority ones, you've got ones optimized for disk, memory, capacity, size. So again, there isn't one option that fits all in this case. Again, the B series, as I mentioned, B is for burstable. So the idea here is you have a time where those machines aren't doing a lot, they're idling along. And then what you can do is basically build up CPU credits while it's idling along. And then as you need those burstable credits that you've accumulated can then be used when you have a spike in the workload. So again, maybe you're doing a reindexing of a database in the middle of the night. Again, you can have that machine doing nothing for a period of time, and then when it needs that high impact CPU, it can take those burstable credits. So again, we've got a lot of flexibility in different types that we've got here with Azure that you can configure. Now, we've also got a hybrid benefit. So if users have some sort of software assurance, then they can apply that in different ways to their infrastructure in Azure. So when we run up an Azure machine, generally, you're paying for the compute, the storage, but generally the cost of the server license is also rolled into that cost. Now, if you have hybrid benefit or software assurance, you potentially can bring your licensing into Azure, and that means obviously then you don't pay for Windows because you've already paid for it once with your software assurance. So again, that's another way to look at saving money when you're running up VMs if you do have that already. Now remember that we've also got the ability for the option for license mobility. Again, it depends on your licensing. Again, speak to Ingram to get the specifics on that. And like I said, if you're running SQL on-prem and you have the appropriate licensing, that may allow you to bring SQL into a virtual machine or into an environment in Azure, and again, reduce the cost because you already have the licenses on-prem. Now, the final thing here is don't forget we've also got automation. So the question is that the way Azure works is it looks at running machines for 730 hours. That's the way they calculate it. You are charged generally by the second for Azure infrastructure, but it looks at it over a period of 730 hours for an average month. The question becomes is, do you need to actually run it for those 730 hours? Now, is it possible to turn off machines or lower their priority after hours, weekends, public holidays? If it is, then you can use scripting to obviously potentially maybe shut down a machine, and then automation at, say, 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock on a Monday morning to power those machines up. So if you can shut it down, obviously over a weekend, and just use it during a weekday, then that's going to save you around 25% of your costs on average. Excuse me. So there are a lot of options that we've got here in Azure that you can already use to save money on your virtual machines. Now, on top of that, we've now got this option for reserved instances. So looking at the stats that Microsoft tell us, they're telling us if we bring not only reserved instances, but also hybrid benefit, we can save 82% on the cost when compared to pay-as-you-go, so just the casual rate. So in essence, what that's going to do, reserved instances is going to give us another way to save money on our Azure implementations. So in essence, Azure reserved instances are the reserving of a virtual machine in advance. So allow you to pick a machine, compute, and then reserve that for a period of time going forward. The advantage to you is you get a fixed cost over that period. The advantage to Microsoft is they can reserve a machine in their data centers for use that they know they don't need to obviously spin up and use on demand. So that's the benefit for both parties. Reserved instances in Azure, you have the option for a 1 or a 3-year term. All right, so you can reserve a machine for 1 year, you reserve a machine for 3 years. Obviously, the longer that you reserve it, the greater the discount will be. And one of the differences with reserved instances is that you'll need to make the payment generally upfront for the machine. All right, so if you're going to reserve it for a year, then the payment will need to be made upfront for that year. Now, again, speak to Ingram directly as to what those costs are, how they'll build, and again, what the requirements are. But remember that you're basically making an agreement with Microsoft to purchase a virtual machine for a period of time. And that means that, again, you're prepaying for that machine for that period. And the great thing is that even though you are prepaying for it upfront, you still basically have the ability to exchange or cancel those reservations. And I'll go into that a little bit further. But basically, you're not locked in for that 12 months. You can't get out. You do have the ability to exchange. So that's typically upgrade, add more power to the machines, okay? And you can then also cancel the reservation. Now, there is a penalty to do that, and I'll cover that a bit further on. But you're not, again, locked into not having the flexibility to change if needed. So the best way we can do this is to put some numbers and some figures around it. Let's go and do some examples here. So I'm going to pick on a single machine here, a DS3 V2, 4 cores, 16 gig of RAM. So a fairly typical, I would think, file server, maybe a bit of a terminal server. So again, some sort of options here, but that's the machine we're looking at. Now, the pay-as-you-go in Australian dollars on the pricing calculator when I did it is $522.55 a month for that. So that's just a casual rate, billed by the second. If you don't use it for the full amount of hours, you don't obviously pay for that. But it's a casual rate. Now compare that to the 1 year reserved instance option. You'll see that that amount drops to $328.70. So that's quite a significant saving just going to a 1 year agreement where you will take that machine. Now, if you are able to extend it to a 3-year agreement, then you'll see the price drops again. So we're down to $275 there for a 3-year reservation of that machine. Now, let's look at that per year. Let's roll this out so we can sort of start comparing apples with apples. So for a pay-as-you-go for a year, if you were to use it for a year, it cost you just over $6,000. If you were to look at it for the 1 year reservation, it's about $4,000. And then for 3 years, again, on that period, it's about $3,300 for that. Now, if we take it out to the full period, so we can compare it all the way, so your pay-as-you-go machine is going to be around $18,000 for that 3-year period. Doing it 3 repeated 1 year reservations is going to cost you about $12,000. And you can see now for the 3 years, we now get to a situation where the savings are quite significant. So we get to just under $10,000 for a 3 life, for the total cost over 3 years. Now, where you can start thinking about using this is that many customers, especially in SMB, are very used to an environment where they buy a machine, physical hardware, they run it for 3 or more years, but generally, let's say 3 years, and then they go and purchase another machine. So they're looking at it in 3-year cycles. They're not used to necessarily paying for hardware by the second, which Azure then conforms. So what this allows you to do, gives you the flexibility to look at a customer and say, you know what, we could come up with a package. Let's say we come up with an annual package where we would bundle in maybe a server, Office 365 licensing, managing, monitoring, all that sort of stuff for a fixed cost. Now, you could say that the recommended retail for that cost of that server was normally $6,000 per year in Azure, but if they do commit to a 1-year contract, then it would only cost them about $4,000. If they were to then do a 3-year contract for that, then that's going to again be about $10,000 for that over that time period. So this gives you the flexibility. You can go pay as you earn, but if you can come up with an enticement or the customer wants to lock in those savings for that period of time, you can go to them with that plan using reserved instances to reduce the costs on that infrastructure. So what happens when we have variations? Everybody wants to know what happens when we have a variation. So let's look at the upside. So what happens when you want to upgrade? All right, so if I want a machine that's more powerful, I want more RAM, I want more CPU, yes, you can do that. And what you'll receive is a prorated refund based on the unused amount. So if you go into it, if you do a 1-year reservation and 6 months in you want more power, then you'll get obviously a prorated credit of that 6 months unused, and that will be applied fully to the purchase of a upgraded machine. So again, you get that credit that you can use then against that new machine. The opposite, if you cancel, then basically what you'll do is you'll receive the prorated refund based on the amount that, again, hasn't been used. So in this case, again, if it was cancelled 6 months into the agreement, on a 1-year agreement, you'd receive the 6 months, obviously, credit back for that cancellation, but there would also be an early termination fee. My understanding of the reading is that, again, that cancellation fee is around 12%. Again, if you want the specifics, I suggest, and the numbers speak to Ingram, they'll be able to let you know what that cancellation fee is exactly and, again, how that would work. But you'll see you've got the ability to vary up and you've also got the ability to cancel if you need. Obviously, there's a penalty because the idea was for you to commit to that period. So, again, there has to be some sort of penalty if you do decide to change that contract. So what are the benefits here? So the benefits are that you can create annual and 3-year offerings now. So rather than having to worry about the month-by-month pricing, you can go in and say, right, if we reserve this instance for this amount of period of time, we know that this is the fixed cost for the machine, right? It's going to basically cost us this independent of any time. So that's the difference here, right? So you're locking in that compute cost without having to be concerned about how long the machine is running. All right, so time becomes to an extent irrelevant when we do a reserved instance. We get the compute time guaranteed for the full month, for the period of the contract that we make. And we're, again, got a fixed billing on that. We can basically have a machine, a reserved instance machine is exactly the same as any other Azure machine. There's no difference. It's just a billing construct. All the machines that are available, again, are available as generally as reserved instances. No technical difference between them in the environment. It's going to support the same Azure tools. It's going to allow you to monitor it, to have the Azure Security Center, to roll up alerts, messaging, and that directly into the environment. All right, and remember, when we're talking about doing infrastructure in Azure, you're going to have the flexibility to use more than a single VM. So again, if you've got a box which has multiple workloads on it, Exchange, file and print, and so on, you can break those out into independent boxes if you want. You can size them specifically for what needed. You can have different levels of disaster recovery on those machines, or the other good thing you can do with Azure now is that you can have nested virtualization. So if you do want to have everything in a single box and have virtual machines on that virtual machine, you can do that in Azure. And you can then also pay as you go, have a 1-year reserved instance or a 3-year reserved instance. There's lots of options that you can work out a package which makes sense for each customer and potentially the offerings that you want to make going to market. The other great thing about all Azure VMs is we can deploy them with a script. So if you can come up with a standard style, small, medium, large server, you can deploy those with a script. So you can go from tenant to tenant to tenant, and when you spin up that Azure machine, you spin it up every time using a script. So that's going to cut down the deployment time. That's going to allow it quicker to market, and it's going to give you a standard environment every single time. You can also look at technologies like desired state configuration, DSC, which will make sure the machine stays within the specs that you define. All right, so again, very handy to manage the environment and make it standard, and again, have it do that for you automatically thanks to things like Azure Automation. Now we can connect Azure infrastructure back to our on-prem environment using a site-to-site VPN. Again, basically we set up a gateway in Azure. We then do a site-to-site VPN as we normally would back to our on-prem environment, and then both sides of the network can see each other. So a good way to start is you may put a member server in Azure, use it as the sync server, move some files across to it, eventually make it a domain controller, and look at swinging and eliminating the on-prem infrastructure over a period of time. All right, so to connect your on-prem environment to an Azure environment, all you need to do is set up a site-to-site VPN. Again, very easy to do in Azure. Okay, and remember that the good thing about Azure is that you can upgrade and scale the machine at any time. So if you have a machine that needs more RAM, you can basically shut that machine down. You can improve the machine type, so you can scale it up from, say, a DS2 to a DS3, reboot the machine, and it's done your hardware upgrade for you in the background. So this is one of the benefits of using something like Azure is that you can, again, upgrade the hardware, the underlying infrastructure quite easily without having, obviously, to go out and purchase additional items. So again, it's going to give you that flexibility. And again, when you look at it as billing through the CSP model, you're going to get all of that billing and invoicing delivered on a single bill for you, which you can then add your margin or roll into your packages and give to the customers directly. So you've got full control over the billing. The billing comes to you, and then you can bill your customers. So I think with that, that is the last slide that I've got. So let me push the down arrow and check. Arun, did we want to look at any questions that have come in?
Sure, yeah, we can kick those off. Just obviously, we've got a couple of questions that have come through into the chat box. The first one is related to Azure File Sync, or AFS. So if one server gets ransomware and the data has been encrypted, does that delete all the good files on all the servers with the encrypted ones?
So the advantage here is with any sort of security, you need to make sure that you implement the appropriate security. Magically putting it in Azure doesn't magically make all your security concerns disappear. Its infrastructure is still infrastructure, but it gives you the ability, obviously, to have better recovery and DR. But at the end of the day, it's still infrastructure, right? So again, you need to look at what's the security, what's the DR. So the way I'd be looking at doing it is, again, I'd be having a server using Azure File Sync to Azure Files. I would have those Azure files using Azure Backup to back those files up, snapshot them or whatever, so that if it was ransomware, then it could easily and quickly be recovered. So again, it doesn't magically make things like ransomware disappear, but you do have more flexibility to cover and protect your environment from things like ransomware.
Okay, thank you, Rob. We've got another question here that's come through. Will it be possible to assign another reserved instance pricing on the same VM? For example, after 3 years has passed, so the price does not change for the customer.
A little bit confused here, but I think what the question is around the fact that, let's take it as a year. At the end of the year, your reserved instance contract has expired. What can you do? You can obviously continue that reserved instance contract on, and at that point in time, I would imagine that the price then is reevaluated based on the price of the machine. Okay, so again, the idea is you take a contract out for a period of time at a set rate, and again, there are advantages to doing that, but the idea, if you went pay-as-you-go, is that over time, generally Azure machines do obviously get cheaper. So that's the balance that you've got to make on that's your planning for that. So again, it's a set fee for a period of time, is my understanding. That will not be able to be varied until the end of the contract, be that 1 year or 3 years. But again, speak to the people at Ingram just to get clarification on that, but that will be my understanding of how the costing is done.
Great, okay, thank you, Rob. I don't see any other questions coming through at the moment, but of course, if we do get some more towards the end, we'll obviously get to those straight after my session. Okay. So, thank you, Rob. You've taken us through sort of the reserved instances and how all that works. Just around how do you as our customers actually order the reserved instance? So there's no difference to the standard ordering process. You will set up the tenant through the marketplace as normal. That is step one, as you're very familiar with today. Because we're actually organizing an upfront payment for the actual reserved instance, based on what's been obviously negotiated for that particular environment or that particular scenario, we do actually require a purchase order for that reserved instance order for the compute and component of that sale. Obviously, if you want to go into more detail, we won't do that through the webinar, but we'll happily take you through that in more detail from the sales team. Either I can do that or any of the sales team. We're very happy to take you through the more detail on how that actually does work. But the process itself does not remain any different. You'll still be able to do everything through the marketplace as normal. Okay. Right, so very exciting. I just want to just quickly pre-announce our new Azure Accelerate program. We're only doing a soft launch today on the webinar, as I mentioned at the beginning, but we will do a full launch towards the end of this month. Basically, the program is putting together a much more structured way to help you around identifying opportunities and working with your customers on how you're going to work through the sales cycle, hopefully to increase your sales around the Azure solution. So we broke it down into basically 5 key areas, working on initially around the customer demand gen and helping you around programs to find opportunities that will obviously apply in the case around the Azure requirement. We'll help you around lifecycle services, preferential pricing, which includes the reserved instances, for example. We'll help you around competencies around the build and the services around that particular solution. That's another question that's come through. And those components will basically allow you to have a lot more structure around how you build that capability, and the sales team will help you through the process really right the way through the cycle, from the initial qualification stage right the way through to the sale, and then obviously the implementation of the customer's environment. We've created a website which you can see there on the page. It's the Azure Accelerate. In there we'll have case studies based on particular workloads and other relevant content, which will help you to frame the conversations with your customers and help identify the right sort of opportunities. I've included there the URL to the Azure Accelerate portal. that site is already live and up and running. Feel free to go in there and look at the content. I've also included under the life cycles page the 4 key areas around.
Can you check if everyone is looking at your screen? I think there is a bit of problem.
Just bear with me, I understand the problem with the screens not sharing.
The screen is not moving, and then the voice is not, the sound is not proper. I dialed in, so I'm fine.
Okay, I'm being told that nobody can see my screen at the moment. Rob, are you still there?
I'm still here and I can see your screen and it's moving. I don't have any issues.
Okay, so you can see it. So we'll continue in that case. Okay. Sorry, just bear with me. Right, I've been told everybody can hear me perfectly, so I'll continue. So we basically included 4 key areas around discovery and assessment and DA. That includes the breakdown of the features and key benefits to help you around those particular sales cycles. We've included the architecture and design, and again, features and key benefits that apply into there. We'll also include components around the proof of concept, and then also finally around migration services. Now you'll hear a lot more from the Ingram team and myself towards the end of this month, when we will do the official launch, and just look out for that coming through over the next few weeks. Okay, and we do have a series of roadshows coming up in Adelaide, the Gold Coast, Canberra and Perth. On my screen now, I've included the dates that they apply. We have included a number of material around reference to where you register for those. If, of course, you haven't seen any of those email communications coming through from the Ingram Cloud team, feel free to reach out to me or any of the team, and we'll obviously get you the details required. For those of you that have not been to any of these sort of roadshows before, or have not been on the recent webinar that we ran to launch it, it's really the contents focused around the umbrella of the Microsoft 365 business flavor. In there, you'll hear about the integration with SharePoint, the components around Azure Directory. Microsoft Teams will be a major component, and the integration points that fits in there, including SharePoint and ATP as well. So the integration will fit nicely in with the other vendor that's part of those particular roadshows, and that will be DocuSign, which is the digital signature components, and how all that integrates, for example, with SharePoint around those typical use cases. So feel free to come along to any of those and spend a half day with us, and hopefully we can help you get a better understanding of the exciting things that's coming up around Microsoft 365 Business and some of the integration pieces that come as part of that, for example, with the automation, with PowerShell and others. All right, so that's me just covering off the roadshow. I think we do have some more questions that have come through. One question we've got here for you, Rob, is does file sync support file locking?
So the answer to that question is it depends, as it always does. The way that Azure File Sync works is slightly different from other syncing technologies because it's based on server technology. It also incorporates things like VSS as well. But I suppose overall, the way to think about it, and if you look at the documents, I'm happy to make these documents available at Microsoft. It basically says that it uses a simple conflict resolution strategy, and that basically means that the last file to be changed retains the name, and any other older files that are in conflict, it basically uses the name and then uses a key or a unique number so that you can see that those things are in conflict. But there are some differences depending on the sort of file it is. So again, Microsoft files like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint can be obviously synced in a much smarter way than large CAD files that Microsoft doesn't know about. So again, it sort of depends, but largely it is I suppose a simplistic one for on average. But I can again give the link to this. But if you want to look at it on the web, it's called Frequently Asked Questions About Azure Files. Just do a search for that, and that'll probably answer most of the questions.
Okay, I think that's the end of the questions for today. So thank you everybody for joining this webinar around our series around Elevate. We look forward to seeing you at the Cloud Awesomeness Roadshows that are coming up in August. And should you have any questions that weren't answered through the session, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the Cloud Sales team for any support that you may require. Thank you and good afternoon.